And then there are these relationships between directors in the municipality and companies that get contracts from the municipality.
Ever wonder where your rates really go? I mean, we're talking billions here paid to the Joburg municipality. Where does it all actually go?
Right. We all want to know that.
Today we're going deep
Deep.
into the city's own documents to try and figure that out. And honestly, what we've found, it's pretty wild. You might even get a little angry.
Yeah, forget the PR, forget the fancy brochures and all the promises.
Exactly.
We've been going through the integrated development plan, the medium-term capital budget. You've got business plans from the big guys like City Power, Pick It Up. And then, of course, you have to look at the financial statements.
All the fun stuff.
All the fun stuff.
Yeah, this is a deep dive.
And our mission here is pretty simple. We just want to show you the unfiltered truth about how the city's handling your money. And spoiler alert, it's not always pretty. We're talking potential corruption, big financial losses,
Oh, yeah.
projects that never actually happen, and a whole lot of just plain inefficiency. Half of Johannesburg's population living below the poverty line in 2022. That's up from 40% just a decade ago.
Wow.
It's a pretty stark reality. But, you know, we are not just going to sit here and dwell on the bad news today. Today we're going deep.
Yeah.
We are going to really try to understand what's going on with the finances and the operations of Joburg Municipality.
Right.
And we've gone through a ton of documents just to make sure we can really understand what's happening and explain it to you without all the jargon.
Right, because, for the listener out there, we're doing the hard work for you.
Yeah.
We're going through these documents, which can be really hard to understand, really technical sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
And we're extracting the key points.
Yeah.
So that you can understand how Joburg really works.
Yeah, and the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Exactly.
And speaking of the ugly, our mission today is basically to do a forensic audit using nothing but these official documents. Like, we are going to try to expose any financial mismanagement, operational problems, or even potential corruption
Right.
based entirely on their own words. We're going to look at every rand, every project timeline and outcome, every problem the city is facing, all the wasted funds, delays, scandals.
Right.
No sugarcoating here,
Oh,
and no taking sides. We are just laying out the facts as we find them.
that's right.
So to get started, I think we really need to lay out what the city says are its biggest problems.
Right. Yeah, and, the city itself is pretty honest about this in its 2024-25 draft IDP and budget.
The IDP, the Integrated Development
Yes.
Plan.
It's a plan for their future.
Right.
And, one of the key challenges that they point out is crime.
Big surprise, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's still a major issue, and particularly gender-based violence. That's a huge concern for them.
Yeah.
And then obviously the economic climate.
Right.
It's not great. There's a lot of global uncertainty impacting South Africa. And then unemployment, especially among young people. They point that out as a key challenge.
Yeah, they really do highlight those economic challenges, don't they? I mean, because on top of all of that, they talk about their own financial instability. They're saying they have operational inefficiencies,
Yeah.
that people and businesses aren't paying for the services that they're getting. And then you throw in low levels of engagement from citizens,
Right.
the growth of informal settlements, and the challenges, of course, that come with undocumented migrants. I mean, it paints a pretty grim picture.
Yeah, it does. And it's not just those social and economic issues.
Yeah.
If we look at 24-25 IDP Final Council, which is another key document that they put out, they point out that pollution from waste management is a major problem.
Yeah, not just the overflowing bins, but the impact it's having.
Right, on the environment.
And the environment overall.
Yeah.
So another big issue that's really important here is energy insecurity.
Right.
And that means load shedding. They identify that as a top priority in their service delivery and budget implementation plan.
Right, SDBIP.
Yes, DBIP.
Which is how they actually plan to implement their budget and their IDP.
Exactly right. And load shedding is not just an annoyance, it is actively damaging the economy and people's lives.
Right. It's really hindering their progress.
Exactly. And I thought it was really interesting, too, how the Johannesburg Development Agency, the JDA,
Yeah.
they lay out that correcting spatial inequalities is like the key objective. In Annexure B4 JDA 2024-25.
That's right, yeah. Because these spatial inequalities are the legacy of apartheid.
Right.
And they really see tackling that as kind of fundamental to everything else they're doing.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And I guess that's where the whole sprawl of Joburg comes into play.
Yeah.
Because in the Johannesburg Spatial Development Framework 2041, they point out how the sprawl The fact that you can't build dense communities.
Right.
That it's actually working against a lot of their goals.
That's right.
Yeah. So we have all these problems, right? The crime, the economy, the spatial inequalities, the energy. And I think now it's time to talk about the money.
Right, yeah.
Let's look at their 2024-25 to 2026-27 medium-term operating budget. Their operating revenue for 2024-25 is projected to be about 76.4 billion rand.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
And operating expenditure is projected to be about 75.7 billion rand.
Wow.
So they're projecting to basically spend almost everything they bring in, but they're also projecting that both their revenue and expenditure are going to increase compared to 2023-24.
Yeah, revenue is expected to increase by 7.3% and expenditure by 8%.
So they think they're going to bring in more, but they're also going to spend a lot more.
Exactly.
And this is where I think we start to get into some interesting stuff.
Right.
So if you look at how they're going to finance their capital expenditure, they're going to rely pretty heavily on external loans. Like we're talking about 2.5 billion rand.
Okay, so they are borrowing money to finance their spending.
Yeah. And they're planning to take from their cash reserves about 1.2 billion rand, 1.9 billion rand from the Urban Settlements Development Grant, and 739.7 million rand from the Upgrading of Informal Settlements Program. So the amount of money they're borrowing is more than double the amount they're taking from their own reserves.
Wow.
Which makes you wonder, how are they going to pay that back?
Right. Because those loans will have to be repaid with interest, and that could affect their budgets for services in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And another thing that really jumps out in the 2024-25 to 2026-27 medium-term operating budget is the 12.1% increase in their electricity revenue budget.
Okay.
Which means it's coming from existing customers paying more.
Right.
And they're proposing an average tariff increase for electricity of 12.72%.
Wow.
So they are really, really looking to earn more money from electricity. But to be fair to them, they also have this goal of reducing their total electricity losses to 28.81% in 2024-25.
So they are also trying to be more efficient.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to reduce the amount they lose through things like illegal connections.
Okay. Yeah, and that makes sense because when you look at Annexure B1 City Power 2024-25 business plan, which is the business plan for city power,
Right.
they identify a big risk from their reliance on Eskom.
Well, and load shedding, right?
Right, yeah. And they're expecting to have about 100 megawatts of load shedding even at stage 1.
Right.
So, I mean, it's understandable that they're trying to reduce their own losses as much as they can.
Yeah, because every unit of electricity that they save is a unit they don't have to get from Eskom.
Right.
Okay, so we talked about how they're bringing in more money, especially through electricity, but something that's really interesting here is that the revenue they're expecting from rentals is actually going to decrease.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So in the 2024-25 to 2026-27 medium-term operating budget, they're projecting that the revenue from rentals on fixed assets is going to go down 26.6% compared to the adjusted budget from 2023-24.
Okay, so that's a significant drop in revenue.
Yeah, it really is. And it makes you wonder, what's driving that?
Yeah, are they selling off properties? Are there problems with lease agreements? It's definitely something that needs more investigation.
It definitely raises a lot of questions. And speaking of inefficiencies, the 24-25 SDBIP reports that their baseline for tender cancellations is 22.2%.
Wow.
With a target of less than 1%.
Okay, so there's a huge gap between where they are and where they want to be.
Yeah, it's more than 20 times higher, which makes you think, what is going on with their procurement processes?
Yeah, why are so many tenders being canceled?
Right, because that leads to delays, it leads to increased costs, and it ultimately hurts the residents because those services aren't being delivered.
Exactly.
So we've seen the money coming in, or at least projected to come in, and how they're going to spend it. But the real question is any of this actually having a positive impact?
Right. What about outcomes?
Exactly. And if you look at the 2024-25 draft IDP and budget.pdf, they do report some progress on things like inclusionary housing.
Right.
They say they've approved over 10,000 units since 2019.
So they are moving in the right direction.
Right. Seems like it.
Yeah.
But the same document also acknowledges that the traditional RDP housing model, which is what they've been using for a long time, it's just not keeping pace with the housing backlog.
Right.
So even though these inclusionary housing projects are good, the old ways of doing things just aren't working fast enough.
Oh, right. They're falling behind.
Yeah. And adapting to climate change, that's another area where they seem to be having a lot of trouble. They say in that same document, the 2024-25 draft IDP and budget, that they just don't have enough land, that they're short on staff.
Oh, really?
They don't have the technical expertise they need.
Yeah.
And their budget's constrained.
Okay.
So all of that is impacting their ability to deal with flooding.
Yeah, and stormwater management.
Yeah, which is worrying because, Johannesburg is really vulnerable to extreme weather events.
Right. And they acknowledge that. They say that their infrastructure, like roads and the power grid, is at risk from these events.
Yeah.
But then they're also saying they don't have the capacity to deal with it.
Yeah.
So that's a bit worrying.
It definitely seems like they're acknowledging the problem, but not necessarily having the solutions.
Yeah.
Now, they do lay out some pretty ambitious performance targets in the 2024-25 draft IDP and budget. Like for Metrobus, they're aiming for 100% compliance with health and safety regulations,
Okay.
including 0 security incidents and 0 fatalities because of seating regulations.
Well, that's good. They're prioritizing safety.
Yeah, it sounds like they are, at least on paper.
Yeah.
And then the Joburg market, they want to be able to bring their backup system online within 55 minutes if their electronic sales system goes down.
Okay, so they're trying to make sure that the market can operate smoothly, even if there are technical problems, which is important because that's a key part of the city's food supply.
It really is. And they also have these goals for property services. Like they want to process 95% of e-property information service requests within 2 working days.
Okay.
And they want to decide on 90% of consent use applications within 2.5 months. So these are really important for businesses and residents because they affect things like development and just how easy it is to do business in the city.
Right.
Now, when we look at specific projects, the People's Plan 2024-25 and the SDBIP Service Delivery and Budget Implementation Plan 2024-25 give us a lot of detail. We see them allocating money for JRA RAMS assessments, sewer upgrades in places like Northern Works, different phases of projects in Cosmo City for housing and transportation,
Right.
money for Pick It Up's new fleet of waste management vehicles,
Okay.
and for Josh Co. social housing projects across the city.
Okay.
But, and this is a big but, these are all future projections. And we already talked about that huge tender cancellation rate. So there is a very big risk that these projects could be delayed or go over budget or even fail completely.
Right. Yeah, and then on top of that, the Pick It Up 2024-25 raises a bit of a red flag.
Oh, what's that?
They say they don't have enough environmental education officers.
Okay.
And that's impacting their ability to keep the city clean and also to implement these waste diversion projects.
So even if they have new trucks, if they don't have the people, it's not going to help that much.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so then we look at Joburg Water. Their business plan sets some targets.
Right.
They want to restore 85% of water service interruptions within 48 hours
Okay.
and clear 92% of sewer blockages within 24 hours.
So those are pretty ambitious targets.
They are. But the document also gives us their performance from 2020-2023, so we can compare and see if they're actually likely to meet those targets.
Yeah, because if their past performance was way below that target, it's going to be pretty hard for them to achieve it.
Exactly. And Joshko says that they're facing financial problems because the Department of Human Settlements is behind on payments for completed projects.
Oh, wow.
And their rental collection rates are really low.
Okay.
So they're in a tough spot.
Yeah, that's going to make it really hard for them to deliver social housing.
Absolutely. And speaking of problems, even the JDA admits that they have procurement issues.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 2024-25 business plan talks about delays in their tender process as a major challenge.
Wow. So they're acknowledging that there are internal problems as well.
Yeah. And then there's this investigation going on with Metrobus.
Okay.
MPAC says that there's an investigation into cash theft.
Oh, wow.
And they've been told to submit a report with the findings.
Okay.
So that definitely raises questions about controls and even potential criminal activity.
Yeah, that's serious.
So, okay. We've seen the problems facing the city. We've seen their budget, their projects, and now we need to talk about the elephant in the room.
The corruption.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the wasted funds.
Yeah.
And the scandals. So, City of Johannesburg Consolidated Financial Statements, 30 June 2024, has a lot of really concerning numbers. Like in 2024, they had unauthorized expenditure in several departments.
Okay.
136,890 Rand in group corporate and shared services. Over 423,000 Rand in human settlement, over 525,000 Rand in public safety, and then over 1,453,918 Rand in group finance.
That's a lot of money being spent without authorization.
It really is, and it means there are some serious problems with their financial governance and controls. But then there's also fruitless and wasteful expenditure. This is money that was basically wasted. It includes things like interest charges and penalties.
Right.
City Power reported over 150,000 Rand. Joburg Water reported over 4,000 Rand. Pick it up, almost 16,000 Rand.
Okay, so across different departments, they're wasting money.
Yeah. And some of the reasons they give are pretty concerning.
Oh, really? Like what?
They're saying a lot of it is interest from late payments.
Okay, so that suggests they're not managing their money well.
Exactly. And then there are these relationships that are reported in the financial
All right,
statements
so
between directors in the municipality or in the entities and companies that get contracts from the municipality.
oh,
So one example is a spouse of a director worked for the Reserve Bank while a company that the director was linked to contracted with the municipality.
okay.
Another example is a spouse worked for the IDC while a company that they were connected to also got contracts.
So potential conflicts of interest?
Yeah. And I want to be very clear here. We are just reporting what's in the documents.
Yeah.
We are not accusing anyone of anything.
Yeah.
But these relationships definitely raise questions about whether things are being done properly.
Yeah, they warrant further investigation.
Absolutely. And then the financial statements also list contingent liabilities.
Mm-hmm.
These are potential future financial obligations that they might have. So, for example, there are some pretty big legal claims against City Power
For what?
for unpaid invoices and damages from project delays.
Okay.
Now, City Power says they're defending themselves against those claims,
Yeah.
but, it is still a risk.
Right, it could cost them a lot of money in future.
And maybe the most worrying of all is the irregular expenditure.
Okay.
This is money that was spent without following the rules.
Okay.
And according to the City of Johannesburg financial statements, 30 June 2024, in 2024, there was over 7 million Rand in irregular expenditure.
Wow, 7 million.
Yeah, 7,125,114 Rand,
Wow.
to be exact.
That's a lot of money not being spent properly.
Yeah. And then on top of all of that, MPAC Oversight Report on the 2022-23 annual report
Yeah?
says that the Johannesburg Property Company, the JPC, has been told to submit a report
Okay.
that lists all of the city-owned properties that are being rented out or occupied without proper authorization.
Oh, wow.
So that suggests that there's a lot of mismanagement of their properties.
Right, and potential loss of revenue.
Exactly. So we've got all of this. The unauthorized spending, the wasteful spending, those relationships with contractors, the legal claims, the irregular expenditure, the problems with properties.
Right.
And it really, really paints a picture of a need for better controls and oversight.
Yeah, and better governance.
Right. Now, to be fair, they do talk about some of their efforts to improve things. Like Joburg Water says in its business plan that they've consistently gotten unqualified audit opinions from the Auditor General from 2017-18 to 2022-23.
Okay, so that's a good sign. It means their financial reporting is in line with the standards.
Right. And they say they're working to address any findings or recommendations from the Auditor General.
Okay.
And then 24-25 IDP mentions that the city has over 300 risk registers,
Right.
which means they at least know about a lot of the challenges that they're facing.
Right. It shows they are aware of the risks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the City of Johannesburg Integrated Annual Report 2023 talks about their Operation Clean Audit Program.
Okay.
And they say that this program is specifically designed to resolve audit findings from the Auditor General
Right.
and to improve their internal controls.
Okay.
So it seems like they're making some effort to improve.
Yeah, it's good that they're at least trying to do something about it. You look at documents like Joburg 2040, the IDP, they talk about this compact, polycentric city where everything's kind of running smoothly.
Right.
Lots of economic growth, good quality of life. It all sounds fantastic.
In theory. In
theory.
Yeah, the idea is great on paper. Strong central business district, well connected to thriving hubs, efficient public transport, sustainable development, like a well-oiled machine, as you said.
Right.
But does the actual budget actually match up to those promises? That's the question.
That is the question. And speaking of money, the medium-term capital budget, that's the plan for the next 3 years, 2024-25 to 2026-27.
Okay.
Big numbers. 7.414 billion Rand in the first year, 7.880 billion Rand the next year,
Okay.
and then it dips back down to 7.425 billion Rand.
So where's all this money coming from?
Well, a good chunk of it, and this is where it gets a little interesting, a good chunk of it is coming from COJ loans. We're talking about 2.5 billion Rand in those first 2 years. Then it jumps up to 3 billion Rand in that third year.
Oh, wow.
The rest is coming from, the city's own cash, some grants from national and provincial government, other sources.
I see. So they're taking out loans to cover these projects.
Yeah, and that's something to keep an eye on, right? Especially because those loans are getting bigger. It's like racking up credit card debt when you haven't even paid off the first one.
Exactly. It's just kicking the can down the road. So let's see how they're spending these billions. What kind of projects are we talking about?
Okay, let's start with housing, because that's a big one, right?
Huge.
So we see 2 million rand allocated to Meadowlands hostel renewal, another 2 million rand for Helen Joseph's refurbishment. Then you've got 32 million rand for Gudrun rental development, 6 million rand for Bolt infrastructure at Diepkloof hostel renewal, and then 7.5 million rand for Elias Motsoaledi X1 township development.
Okay, so I'm looking at these numbers. And 2 million rand for hostel renewals. I mean, that's barely enough to scratch the surface. We're talking about huge housing backlogs in these areas. What can you really achieve with that kind of money?
Exactly, it's a drop in the ocean. It makes you wonder, are they really serious about tackling the problem, or are they just trying to look good? What are the timelines on these projects? When are people going to see actual results?
Right. Where's the accountability?
And then there's energy infrastructure, which, as we all know...
Oh, don't get me started.
Yeah, 15 million rand to replace old meters with prepaid ones, 30 million rand to extend the Mondior substation, 60 million rand for those statistical meters, and 35 million rand to build a whole new switchyard in Pennyville.
Okay, well, on the surface, investing in infrastructure sounds good. But the real question is this enough to actually make a difference? 15 million rand for city-wide meter upgrades, come on. And how long is it going to take for these substation upgrades to translate into reliable power for residents? We've heard all this before.
Exactly. Actions speak louder than words. And then, of course, the roads.
Oh, the roads.
70.5 million rand allocated for resurfacing.
Okay.
Which sounds decent until you consider the state of some of these roads. You hit one pothole and suddenly you need a whole new suspension.
Absolutely. So again, where exactly is this money going? Which roads are being prioritized? And is this a long-term fix or just a quick patch job?
And speaking of quick fixes, let's talk about the halfway house water upgrade. That's an interesting one.
Oh yeah, what's going on there?
So initially they had a budget of 78 million rand,
Okay.
but then it gets slashed down to a measly 10 million rand by 2026-27.
Whoa, what?
Yeah, like what happened? Did the project suddenly get smaller? Were there issues they didn't anticipate? It's a massive cut.
It's a red flag for sure. It makes you question the planning, the commitment to these crucial projects. But I will say, Joburg Water as a whole, they do have ambitious plans. They're proposing a 9.5 billion rand investment over 5 years.
Okay.
To upgrade pipes, expand those wastewater treatment plants, increase reservoir capacity. That's not insignificant.
Sounds good.
But we have to see how that money is actually spent. Will it lead to fewer burst pipes, more reliable water for everyone? That's what matters.
And that brings us to service delivery, right? It's one thing to have these fancy plans and these big budgets, but are they actually delivering? The city has its own service delivery and budget implementation plan. They set these targets for things like repairing water pipe bursts within 48 hours, clearing sewer blockages within 24 hours. Sounds good, right?
Right. But are they actually meeting those targets? I mean, if the infrastructure is crumbling and hasn't been maintained, even the best workers are going to struggle. It's like trying to build a house on a foundation of sand.
Yeah, and it gets worse. Unauthorized expenditure has skyrocketed to 8.976 billion rand this year.
Wait, billions with a B.
Billions with a B, compared to 4.186 billion rand the year before.
That's a massive jump. That's a sign that something is seriously wrong. Who approved this spending? Where are the checks and balances? This is your money we're talking about.
It's mind-boggling. And then there's Pickup and Parks. They did this review of how long their assets are supposed to last. And this led to Pickup's value dropping by, get this, 5.001 billion rand.
5 billion rand. That's not just a little oopsie. That suggests either their stuff is falling apart way faster than they thought, or they haven't been taking care of it properly. And when you consider the concerns about the lifespan of those landfills, Ennerdale, Robinson Deep, Marie Louise, we're talking about a potential trash crisis down the line.
Yeah, not good. And then there's Metrobus. Our public transport system, it's struggling. Ridership is down, which means fare revenue is down.
Of course.
And they're projecting even further declines in revenue in the coming years.
So what are they doing about it? A failing public transport system hurts everyone. It affects jobs, education, access to health care. If people aren't using the buses, we need to know why. Is it reliability? Are the routes not working? Is it too expensive? And if the revenue keeps dropping, who's going to pay for it? Will it fall on the shoulders of the taxpayers? This is a big problem.
And you would hope, with all that going on, that there would be strong systems in place to catch this stuff, to prevent it. The city says they have this group risk management framework based on best practices.
They do. They talk about ISO 31000, QSO, all these fancy frameworks for identifying and managing risks. But when you see billions in unauthorized spending, hundreds of billions wasted, it makes you wonder how effective these frameworks really are. Is anyone actually using them? Or are they just for show?
Right, like a rubber stamp.
Yeah.
Then they have the group Forensic Investigation Services, or GFIS.
Okay.
They're currently investigating 43 cases, totaling 31.4 million rand. They're supposed to complete these investigations within 100 working days.
So that sounds promising, but 31.4 million rand, that's a drop in the bucket compared to the billions we've been talking about. It makes you wonder, are they only going after the small fry? Are they really equipped to tackle the big cases of corruption? And then there's the issue of actually resolving these issues. The rate at which they're addressing findings from internal audits from the Auditor General, it's very low. It's not enough to just find the problems. They need to fix them.
Yeah, and then this is where things get a little murky. On the governance front, the city tracks staff vacancy rates. They aim for less than 10%.
Okay.
Which sounds reasonable, right?
Sure.
But high vacancy rates can really mess things up. It can lead to delays in projects, a lack of oversight when it comes to finances, and ultimately it means services aren't being delivered effectively. So we need to know which departments have the most vacancies and how that's contributing to the problems we're seeing.
Right, because if the people aren't there to do the work.
It's not going to happen. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Talk about the economy. The city's always talking about boosting the economy, attracting tourists. They say they brought in 11.36 billion rand in investment back in 2022-23.
Okay, well, that's good, right? Investment is important. But we need to know more. Is this investment actually leading to jobs for residents? Is it translating into tangible benefits for the city?
Yeah.
And what about the Joburg Tourism Company? They're spending money on tourism initiatives, but are they getting a return on that investment? Are tourist numbers going up? Is tourism revenue increasing? Because they actually have unfunded projects, which suggests they might not have the resources to really maximize the city's potential.
Interesting. Finally, let's talk about social and community development. The budget for this is supposed to, improve people's lives, and we see this project for minor upgrades to all social development facilities.
Okay.
Budget, 800,000 rand in 2024-25.
For the entire city.
For the entire city.
That's nothing. I mean, what kind of real improvements can you make with that kind of money? It raises serious concerns about how committed the city actually is to improving these essential services. And while they talk about upgrading informal settlements and providing basic services to 45 settlements, there are hundreds of informal settlements across the city. Progress is going to be slow, and it's really going to depend on whether they actually allocate the necessary resources in the future. And, the ongoing issues in places like Deep Sloot, they just highlight how complex and expensive these problems are.
Right, no easy solutions. So let's take a step back. We've seen billions in the budget, ambitious plans, but also a lot of evidence that suggests there are serious issues in how the city is managing your money.
Big time.
We're talking about hundreds of millions wasted, billions in unauthorized spending, problems with asset management, revenue declining in key areas like Hiccup and Metrobus, and some serious questions about governance and oversight.
It's a mess. It's a big mess. And it's not just numbers on a page. This is your money, your rates, your taxes. Money that should be used to make Joburg a better place for everyone.
Absolutely. This level of potential waste and mismanagement, it should be a huge concern for every resident of Johannesburg. So here's the question, and I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this. What can citizens do to demand better financial management, more transparency from the city? How can you, as a ratepayer, hold your elected officials accountable?
That's the million-rand question, isn't it?
It is.
I think the first step is to be informed. Dig into these reports, ask tough questions, get involved in the process. Don't just sit back and let this happen. Okay, so let's take a step back and summarize everything we've learned.
Right.
We've seen a city facing some pretty big social and economic challenges. They have a huge budget, but they're relying a lot on loans to fund it.
Yeah.
They're raising electricity prices, and they desperately need to reduce the amount of electricity they're losing.
Right.
We found some really concerning inefficiencies, especially with how they handle tenders.
Yeah.
And then there's all of this unauthorized spending, wasteful spending, and irregular expenditure. And those relationships between people in the city and companies getting contracts, that definitely raises some red flags.
Yeah.
And we can't forget about those legal claims and how they're managing or maybe mismanaging their properties. And it's all happening at the same time that they're struggling to deliver basic services and complete projects on time and within budget.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to remind everyone that everything we've talked about here today comes directly from the City of Johannesburg's own documents. This is not speculation. This is not hearsay.
Right. This is based on their own reporting.
Right. This is what they're saying about themselves. And that's why this is so important for you, the listener. because understanding these details is the first step towards engaging with your local government and holding them accountable.
Right.
You have to know the facts so that you can ask the right questions and demand better from the people who are supposed to be serving you.
Yeah, exactly. So here's a thought for you. Given everything we've talked about today, all the money involved, all the potential mismanagement, the possible corruption, what other questions should you be asking?
Yeah.
What can you do to make sure that the municipality is more transparent, that they're accountable for how they spend your money, and that they're actually delivering the services that you need?
Yeah, and it makes you think.
Yeah.
Because the city has all these goals for making Joburg more sustainable, equitable, and prosperous.
Right.
But how are they going to achieve any of that if they can't even get their finances and their operations in order?
Right, exactly. I mean, if they can't even handle the basics, how are they going to achieve those bigger goals?
Yeah, food for thought. Right.
That way.
So for our listeners who want to dive even deeper, I would encourage you to look for these documents yourselves, if you can find them,
Yeah.
or follow news reports about the city's finances and governance. Because the more we all know, the better equipped we are to demand change.
That's right.
Your voice matters.
Absolutely. And we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on all of this? What are your experiences? Share them with us on social media, however you want to connect. This is a conversation that we need to keep having.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, this is about the future of our city. We all need to be part of the solution.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.